After learning that Barbara was her biological mother, Leslie no longer lingered in a state of personal shock but instead forced herself to reread the notebook of her life as if it were a strategic dossier. The fragmented image of a childhood full of missing pieces suddenly turned into the outline of a plan, where every small detail could become an advantage against a powerful family that staged everything according to their own standards. Leslie understood that emotions only slowed the pace, while everything that existed at Fairmont Crest operated on calculations of benefit, reputation, and control. In the labyrinth of charity galas, photoshoots, and flowery speeches, the truth rarely revealed itself on its own, it had to be staged like a performance. And so, Leslie chose a path few would imagine, a cold trajectory where blood ties were transformed into political weapons. She examined contracts, traced the flow of donations, reviewed every public appearance Barbara had made, and considered how to connect seemingly scattered data into a narrative that would force her opponents to answer. At the moment she took her first steps down this path, it was not fury that spoke but discipline, and discipline demanded she walk straight into the center of family power, into the space where Anita always controlled the game. Leslie approached Anita not with pleas or accusations, but with the precision of someone negotiating rightful ownership. She carried documents proving her blood relation to Barbara, estimates of the assets linked to the financial streams Barbara had once influenced, and directly proposed a fair transfer plan. In Leslie's calculation, a decisive agreement could transform family tension into a clean legal process, minimizing public fallout and paving the way for new relationships in a community sensitive to scandal. But the center of power where Anita stood was not built on compromise, it was reinforced by the rhythm of surprise and Anita's mastery of controlling the narrative. As if the paths were pre-paved, Anita moved half a beat ahead with a cascade of swift decisions, activating her legal team, calling in media advisors, contacting close donors, and in such a short span of time that public opinion barely had time to breathe, the entire sum Leslie sought was converted into a charitable foundation bearing her very name. No permission, no negotiation, only a press release accompanied by a dazzling plan for a new fund, framed as an honor. From that moment, the game changed grounds. The birth of the Leslie Foundation was rolled out like a visual art campaign. Formal portraits, behind-the-scenes videos, and inspiring stories of young generations overcoming adversity all placed Leslie at the symbolic center, a role she had never agreed to. A glowing sign reading Leslie Foundation was erected in the lobby of a central hotel, across from a wall displaying images of future community projects. On social media, posts of gratitude and fundraising campaigns spread with a velocity usually reserved for major entertainment events. Public discourse began praising Leslie's generosity, her supposed ability to turn private conflict into public good, painting her as a role model for those lost in family turmoil. Her name now rang out with praises that clashed with her inner reality, and the very stripping away of her right to choose made her realize that Anita's aim was not just to win in the boardroom, but to seal victory on the battlefield of public image. The counterattack struck straight at the thin skin of pride, forcing Leslie into a trap. To object would mean attacking a humanitarian program that carried her name, to remain silent meant accepting an identity written by someone else. Leslie chose not to stay silent. She launched legal proceedings demanding the court review the validity of the asset conversion into the new foundation, arguing that inheritance tied to blood could not be redirected into a unilateral donation by way of administrative maneuvering. Her petition sought an emergency order to freeze the fund's expenditures, filed alongside evidence of her biological connection to Barbara and the assets under dispute. From the moment the court accepted the case, Fairmont Crest transformed into a multi-layered stage. Outside the courthouse, reporters, cameras, commentators, and seasoned observers from the wealthy district dissected every gesture. Inside, legal filings scrutinized every figure and signature, tracing the flow of money through connected accounts. What began as a personal dispute between two women bound by complicated ties now evolved into a lesson in narrative power, where society preferred inspiration over legal detail. Those who came out of curiosity soon realized they were watching a staged performance where truth fought for every second of broadcast. Anita deployed her strengths like a stage artist. Without ever directly attacking Leslie, her carefully orchestrated media campaigns painted a clear picture: a mature woman turning conflict into contribution, a younger generation learning to share through a foundation in their name, a community gaining support. In court, her legal team stressed the independence of the fund, the governance of its supervisory board, transparent bylaws, and clauses prohibiting personal interest. Outside, stories about families being supported, scholarships granted, and counseling centers opening flooded the air, forming a network of optimism. In this landscape, Leslie was recast as someone clawing money away from what was now being framed as the community's future. The public, always fond of neat moral portraits, easily cast her as the villain, a disguised face of greed. Each glowing editorial about the new foundation felt like a sharp needle pricking her pride, and Leslie had to learn how to breathe slowly in an atmosphere demanding proof she was not the person others claimed she was. Meanwhile, Barbara continued to move like a shadow across still waters, reflecting but leaving no fingerprints. No real consequence ever touched her. The whispers of her role in Fairmont Crest's endless intrigues never stopped. She continued to exploit Eva as a pliant bridge to extract money from Ted, and disturbingly, she succeeded every time. It was not the loud chaos of blackmail, but a chain of hints, persuasions, manipulations of gratitude, and promises of projects that would collapse without an immediate donation, dragging everyone involved into scandal. Eva, vulnerable to Barbara's calculated care, kept serving as the fragile go-between in secret meetings, open letters, and plans presented as salvation. Ted, worn down by media scrutiny, preferred paying to silence rumors, perpetuating the financial flow Barbara desired. Each payment was cloaked in a new mask of philanthropy, forcing anyone who wanted to pierce the truth to wade through the swamp of noble words. Leslie realized that every reputation war needed pauses to reset structure. She stopped reacting to false praises and quietly investigated the foundation's founding documents. She examined overlooked details, administrative clerks signing off on minutes, secondary legal advisors reviewing statutes, accountants drafting financial summaries. These people rarely saw themselves as part of a battle, and their casual honesty revealed the veins of power. Leslie discovered a peculiar clause allowing the foundation's board of patrons, controlled by Anita's loyalists, to redirect investments into affiliated companies if necessary to sustain liquidity. Innocuous on the surface, it in fact opened the door to circular transactions difficult to trace. Leslie did not reveal it yet. She filed it away as an arrow to unleash in court at the perfect moment for maximum resonance. The first trial unfolded like a scripted drama with unexpected beats, streamed live and consumed like a weekend entertainment show. Every participant was turned into a character in a collective story, where each nod, each phrasing rhythm, each placement of hands was dissected as evidence of essence. Leslie appeared calm, carrying neatly tabbed files, knowing victory did not rest on the bulk of documents but on forcing the opposition to expose their hunger for control. Anita entered as always, steady steps, serene gaze, letting her legal team speak. As evidence began to project across screens, tension tightened like strings on an instrument. Outside, social media ignited with new waves of commentary, half admiring, half gloating, as though people were waiting for a single slip to rewrite the story more dramatically. Leslie pressed on her core argument: bloodline created legal inheritance rights, and such rights could not be transferred to a new legal entity if it harmed rightful heirs. She submitted medical proof of her relation to Barbara, adoption records confirming she had lived unaware of her mother's identity for years, and documentation aligning suspiciously timed asset transfers into the foundation with her public revelation of lineage. It was not an accusation, but a framing that compelled the court to question goodwill. Anita countered with an equally solid defense: the foundation had independent governance, regular audits, bylaws against conflicts of interest, and proof of funds already allocated to pilot projects. In this narrative, Anita needed no attack, only to invite the court and public to see reality. Money already set upon the tracks of meaning. As the legal and media fronts maintained their rhythm, Barbara quietly reinforced her influence with strategically designed donations. Eva resurfaced in discreet encounters, delivering soft yet chilling reminders that Ted's money was needed to safeguard vulnerable projects. Each payment blurred the origin of funds further. Leslie, watching from a distance, knew that confronting Barbara head-on would only paint her as the destroyer of a beloved philanthropic story. She bided her time, uncovering a thread: a service company linked to the foundation tied back to a shell organization previously associated with Barbara. It was not yet conclusive, but it was enough to push for court-mandated disclosure of contracts and guarantees. In a long war, every publicized document was a pebble hitting the water's surface. The turning point came not in court but at the foundation's first official gala. Anita displayed her full orchestration. Lights soft as silk, stages decorated with community project models, tables glittering with symbols, and short films of hopeful stories. Leslie attended as a reluctant guest, positioned just enough for cameras to capture her face, but not forced to speak. Bitter taste fused with cold reason as she realized every gesture of hers could be exploited as proof of generosity. She chose neutrality, detaching from the noisy emotions, focusing instead on observing. Backstage, she noticed informational panels about the foundation's structure, where the clause on shifting investments appeared as a barely visible note. Those tiny lines revealed a mechanism for short-term loans between affiliates, a gap that allowed money to slip through hidden tunnels. Leslie memorized the detail, resolved to demand court review of internal loan agreements as part of transparency proceedings. The next trial moved faster, as the court agreed to examine transactions between the foundation and its affiliated companies. No dramatic curtain dropped, but pinholes appeared. Records revealed revolving loans and repayments, service fees under vague professional categories, repeating names hidden within small LLCs. For the first time, the public, swept up by slogans, slowed down to notice the necessity of concrete transparency. Anita remained serene, backed by her professional network, and even the exposed irregularities were not fatal blows. Leslie understood this and sought not collapse but an interim ruling to shift balance. The court delivered a compromise: the foundation could operate, but under tighter supervision by a court-appointed independent committee. All related party transactions must be reported in detail, and Leslie's hereditary rights were provisionally preserved. Not an ending, but a rung secured in writing. Barbara's name was never directly mentioned, yet her cold presence lingered like mist. She never retreated, moving along gray lines of influence, while every time the public thought they saw a signpost, it dissolved into mere reflection. Eva remained ensnared by Barbara's disguised care. Ted kept finding it easier to sign checks than face speculation-heavy headlines. In this board, Leslie realized her true adversary was not a woman across from her in court, but a storytelling machine of society itself, where people preferred pleasing symbols over true conflict. She adjusted her strategy once more, building a discreet network of persistent detail seekers, forensic accountants, operational insiders. No spotlight shone on this work, but it was the only base strong enough to hold future leverage. Leaving the courthouse on a damp afternoon, Leslie passed through cameras like a figure needing no explanation. Questions flew, but she added no syllable to a narrative stretched thin enough to tear. In rare inner quiet, she admitted that the public slap of a foundation bearing her name had stung, but the sting had become a measure of discipline. She no longer sought validation from a community enamored with pretty stories. Instead, she aimed for an unseen destination, where a long enough chain of details could crystallize into truth. Anita across the aisle still bore the serenity of a stage conductor. Barbara still moved unseen like a silent maestro. Yet pinholes had appeared, and Leslie knew water always finds its path once cracks form. She returned home with new notes, a list of documents to subpoena, a plan to reach overlooked minor players holding hidden keys, and a determination shaped not by resentment but by the patience of a craftsman. The story was not finished, and perhaps would not end in spectacle. Trials would continue, financial reports would be scrutinized, editorials would keep assigning moral labels to real people. At Fairmont Crest, where everything was shaped in glossy molds, anyone seeking to keep their identity had to learn to converse with a colossal narrative machine. Leslie now understood how it ran, and she no longer wished for its favor. Her sole task was to trace the undercurrents, turn each discovery into structural shifts, until one day the gap between symbol and truth grew unbearable. When that gap collapsed under its own weight, someone would fall. It might not be Barbara, it might not be Anita, it might even be Leslie herself if she lost balance between resolve and obsession. But what she had now was self-awareness, a sense of limit, and a vow not to become the distorted version others wished to exploit. Night descended over Fairmont Crest as always, cloaking its grand gates and back paths, and beneath the shadows, a woman sat at her desk, drawing fine lines, illuminating points on a map, waiting for the morning when the public would tire of pretty words long enough to notice the details. Across the city, another woman softly closed a door, set down her phone like the last note of a score, letting silence blend into routine. Their story did not retreat, it stretched and contracted with every decision. And while others obsessed over a foundation's name, the real lines were threading elsewhere, where numbers formed a language slow but steady. In that language, Leslie was no longer an unwilling symbol but the reader of her own score, ready to change the melody when the right note struck.